Hello, hello. It is Sunday, March 3rd, at least in the part of the world I'm in, outside of DC, and this is Archetypal Hour. We were just kind of chatting a little bit about Dune, the book and the movies, and the David Lynch even movie from the 80s, a little bit before we got started. So I wouldn't be surprised if some Dune archetypes make their way. Maybe a sandworm makes its way into this container, but um, as always, I'd love to just hear what archetypes are coming up for you all lately. So these are maybe forms that seem to be forming your perspective or your point of view. To ask the question slightly different yet again, or maybe shapes that are shaping that point of view, that sort of perspective. I think I'm also channeling the cinematography elements of Dune right now, where I'm really like, I've been hearing Denis in all these interviews about Dune and talking about these shots and the cinematography. So now I'm like, what are those patterns, those shapes, those forms, those archetypes that are shaping your perspective, like a shot, like your frame, the way that you're seeing sort of whatever you're looking at. But feel free to answer this question however you feel called to. If there's any archetypes that are coming for you at all, I would love to hear them. I have a few that popped, and last night was really kind of interesting in that regard. But as always, I want to really start with the folks that are here live before I start bringing in my rant stuff. So feel free to throw it in the chat or come right off of mute if you're comfortable doing so. Boom, boom, boom. It's like hold music. I see people typing, so I'm gonna keep humming until I see those mics come off mute. Uh-oh. It's a quiet group today. All right. I can wait. Hold us holding space, y'all. Boom, boom, dum, holding space. Ooh, that's fair. And is it okay if I call you Gaia as we talk? Wonderful. Ooh, okay. We've got a couple to start with. So two that are coming up for folks, and we'll see how we want to start day. One is the mermaid archetype has been alive for Hoda. Sirena. No, I think I added the Enya. Sirena? Probably Sirena. La Sirena, as they say. Mermaid archetype. La Sirena. Ooh. And Anna says, I always associate yellow crocuses with the Ace of Wands. And she just passed. That's a beautiful picture. And she just passed the yellow crocus coming out of the leaves. That's a beautiful image. Funny. Okay, now we're seeing a couple mermaid links here. Gaia has also said, not me just watching a movie with Cher called Mermaids. Ooh. All right. Let's get started with some mermaids. I'm into this. Hoda, I don't know if you want to kick us off with this conversation about maybe what aspects of the mermaids feel more alive, or whatever comes up for you.
Yeah. I actually went to an exhibit this week, which I talked a little bit about in Roundup, where the artist Wangichi Matu, her exhibit was on display at the New Orleans Museum of Art, and the exhibit was called Intertwined, and it featured a sculpture of a mermaid who was set to be modeled after. Actually, hold on, let me check. Said to be modeled after cultural lore, and the cultures that were associated. Let me just make sure I'm getting this correct. The cultures associated. The piece was called Water Woman. It's made out of bronze, and it was sculpted in 2017. It highlights water spirits and deities, including Najuzu, Yamoja, Oshun, Mamiwata, and Gabre Manyo from the Zimbabwe, Yoruba, Pan African, and Somali culture. So it's basically myths surrounding feminine water dwelling deities developed alongside the spread of trade, I'm reading now, and colonization across the African continent using local folklore with imported imagery and ideas, often depicted with imagery drawn from East Indian and West African traditions. Mami Wata is recognizable across the Atlantic world as a fish human hybrid capable of bringing good or bad fortune. Water Woman, which is the name of the piece, which might be understood as Mutu's take on Mami Wata, also bears resemblance to the Nuguva from coastal Kenyan and Tanzanian lore, thought to be derived from the dugong, a relative of the manatee. So it's a really beautiful, like evocative image. And I feel like it's just stayed with me, like just in general. Since seeing it, I don't really know what like way it's like shaping or forming my world, but it's just, yeah, it's like one of those images that's in the like screen or the purview of my like field. And I'm really enjoying like, I guess, like working with that symbology. It's been really juicy.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Hoda. And I think I dropped the sculpture in the chat because I know you posted it. You were talking about this intertwined exhibit in gallery, which is beautiful. Like all the pieces are gorgeous. So I think I found the right image. Um, wow. So first of all, it is so amazing. Like even just hearing the sweep of just even the inspirations for this exhibit, just how like common the mermaid archetype is across so many cultures. It is such a powerful thing. It is an interesting why that particular archetype is so present. It seems interdependent or independently across the world. I will say one thing that comes up for me, but maybe because I'm like I kind of am sensing how it might tie to something that's been coming up for me lately is she just shared another picture, and that is even more striking. Wow. Um, is I don't know. I find like if we were to like group mermaid with like even a bigger umbrella archetype, I might maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I might want to also kind of group it with that general category of archetype of like the human mixed with an animal, right? In this case, a human and a fish, right? I'm someone who has a lot of Sagittarius energy, so I've always been drawn to like the centaur. Also, like there's a lot of these cool archetypes where there is this human animalistic interplay, and I do feel like these types of archetypes have something to say about this sort of balancing of more instinctual, more close to like I guess wild, the word that's coming up for me, like aspects of us with maybe some of the higher level consciousness type of aspects of us. At least that's what's coming up for me. And I do find that really interesting with the mermaid archetype. And then of course, like the idea of like the human that's of the ocean is very powerful and juicy and feels Piscean too to me, which I know comes up a lot in these. I feel like Pisces has been making its way into a lot of conversations lately. Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to opine or share if mermaid has been an archetype that they've ever felt any closeness to it, or if there's particular mermaids or from that particular archetype that have stood out to you in your past or maybe in your field now. I see some typing, so I'll wait see if anyone else has mermaid their own individual mermaid lore. And Hoda, I don't know if you have like any general from your own contemplative practice and meditation and channel. Do you have any sense of like the sort of some of the more metaphysical notes of this archetype? Only if something comes up.
Yeah, I appreciate what you shared too, because I feel like what's coming up for me is like it like kind of might from my standpoint kind of stands as like an archetype for like emotional affairs or like the emotional like watery reality of like humanity. And yeah, it does feel kind of like Piscean in the sense that it is like water dwelling, like a water dwelling creature. And also this blending too really stands out to me, just to reflect what you were saying about the humanoid kind of archetype. And there are many like iterations of it, like you said, like centaurs, there are like mermaids, mermen, there are like elven and fae who are like a blending of like this, I guess, metaphoric like relationship between like humans and like the elements and like the elementals. So like just to yeah, kind of like home back into the like Mami Wata like mermaid archetype, I feel like globally you could probably find like mermaid archetypes. It would be safe to say that they probably, if you do find them, they probably have something to do with like emotional regulation. Um, yeah, that's what's coming up for me right now.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. That water element proximity. Although it's kind of funny because when you said the emotional piece and the regulation piece, I was thinking about how many myths where the the sirens or the mermaids are like really like a dysregulating force or like a really trickster kind of energy too, right? Like they remind me very much of the Fae in that while in certain pop culture ways mermaids and like with like little kids mermaids and fairies and stuff are like oh they're so cute and fun but like in the actual myth they're usually quite dangerous actually you have to be really mindful if you're around these types of energies uh, at least that's my sense of it and certainly they can be quite dangerous and it's funny actually we were looking for something to watch with my daughter and there's a new movie that had come out not too long ago I think it's something called like Ruby something Teenage Kraken where she's a kraken and her arch enemy in this high school but also in this sort of sea is a mermaid and the mermaid's like this really awful like they call out mermaids as like narcissistic and all this in this particular movie so I think it's interesting. Thank you Hoda for calling that. Yes. So in chat, she says, yes, in pop culture, they're projected on in different ways, I feel, namely, and you guessed it, in the West. Uh huh. Yeah, that's a really big difference. Hmm. The sanitization is what Anna says. Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Hey, Psychonaut. Nice to see you. We are just getting started, and the first archetype that had come up was mermaids. We were just discussing that, and I was just doing last checks to see if there's anything else that was coming up for folks before we kind of maybe someone else was feeling called to talk about something that was coming up for them in their field. I think because I talked about the kids movie, like I'm like I'm having a hard time not having the Little Mermaid pop into my mind right now. And it was recently remade. Yeah, it was. That's true. I haven't seen the new one yet, but it looked cool. I also think it's really powerful to like that as a part of this typical mermaid archetype, this ability to use the voice, in particular music, to great effect, whether it's to like hypnotize or put to sleep or distract or, kind of make people crash. Like this power of sound is really interesting, blended with this mermaid. Like, I do wonder why sound, like how that became such a part of that archetype, such an interesting aspect. But it does show up in most of the mermaid lore that I'm aware of, at least. Yes, Oda says to seduce and to serenade. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that. Yeah, the seductive piece is really a big part of that archetype too. In some of these lineages or stories. Hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean, I also just find ocean archetypes really beautiful because the ocean is so vast and mysterious and like beautiful, but also wildly dangerous. Like, it's a very interesting place archetypally. Psychonauts says Selkies. You want to say anything more about that? He said, no, they'll hear you. Yeah, smart man. Yeah, I guess I should be really careful talking talking the way I'm talking, a little too flippantly about the merfolks. But I'm not sure. Selkie, I'm not. I don't know too much about them. Let me look it up real quick just to get the wiki version. They are Selkies are mythological creatures that can shapeshift between seal and human forms by removing or putting on their seal skin. They feature prominently in the oral traditions and mythology of various cultures, especially those of Celtic and Norse origin. The term Selkie derives from the Scots word for seal and is spelled as Silkies, Silkies, or Selkies. They're sometimes referred to as Selkie folk. They're mainly associated with the Northern Isles of Scotland, where they are said to live as seals in the sea but shed their skin to become human on land. Whew. Thank you. Mm. Well, I guess before we move on to anything else, because I think what's coming from me, what came up for me last night, especially, kind of has a relationship to this. So I'll just stick with this theme too. But feel free to like come in with anything that you feel like saying, please. Um, But if anyone else has anything else they want to say about these archetypes where there is a combination of animal and human coming together, or even just in general, if there's any fauna archetypes that are coming up for you, I'm interested in that too. Oh, having some technical difficulties. I feel like this is a quiet group. I'm see if I can. What can I do to break this up a little bit? Come on, y'all. Come on, just come up and say something. do 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 do. Well, let me hold a little more space before I jump in with my stuff. Oh, you're not the only one, Psychonaut. Canada was snacking too. It's snack time. I get it. 3 o'clock is the perfect time to be snacking too. Well, I don't know what time zone you're in, but that's what time zone it is now. But this, like, if you're in the late afternoon era, guy is definitely eating too. I love this. The food archetypes. Yes. Everyone's snacking right now. That's cool. Um, yeah, I guess the reason why I didn't want to like jump into my stuff, but thank you for the invitation, Hoda, was just because like I don't really quite know what was going on last night, but I'm kind of curious. Well, I hope everyone. I've got some tea that I need to get into myself too. It is snack time. Yeah. So, if no one else has anything that's popping for them on mermaids or this archetype, I will say last night, every once in a while when I'm in my backyard doing my thing, um, a star or a planet, something will catch my eye in the sky, and I'll just be really drawn to it. Sometimes I'll look up the star mythology or kind of make sense of what's going on. And that doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while I'll just be like, yeah. Like I sometimes I'll just look at a star and I feel like that star is looking at me too. I don't know if it makes any sense, but I feel like we're sharing something right now. So I'm trying to lean into it. And last night it was Sirius. Last night it was the star Sirius that came up and felt like, at least for me, it felt like there was a desire for some kind of conversation, I guess. I felt like we were kind of feeling each other out a little bit. Yeah. Guys, this intense eye stare. Yes. But it did feel like we were kind of sizing each other up a little bit. Etherically, or maybe it was just in my imagination, but either way, it was happening, whether it was a projection or legitimate. And I found it really fascinating, this feeling. And we were kind of making jokes, but why I thought about it today too, because of the mermaid animal thing, was I was kind of like feeling into this idea that like, I don't know much about Sirius. I don't know what Sirius knows about me. No, just joking around. But I was like, but I do feel like I felt like there was overlap between dog, right? So like Sirius is not in every lineage associated with a dog, but it is in a lot of the lineages, or at least that's where the name comes from, like the Greek name. And I kind of had this feeling like as we were doing this, we were kind of both like had some common energies around dog. And so I was really sitting with dog. Like what does that look like? How is dog archetype, like the archetype of the dog? Like what have I learned from living with dogs? How do I feel like I share a lot of common energies with dogs? And so that kind of serious kind of I felt like was opening me up to this contemplation of dog. Um which I thought was really interesting. And then I was kind of getting a little too silly with it, playful. Sometimes if I get into these states and I get to weird areas where I'm feeling too reverent or too fearful, I'll kind of start cracking jokes a little bit. Again, as we talked about during that raucous roundup, whether it's like part of the aligned or a cope, I don't know sometimes, but it does happen for me. But then anyway, when I opened my eyes back up, Sirius wasn't there no more. The clouds were now covering it. I thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, Sirius, you ducking out on me. And then I noticed the star above it, and I said, whoa, this guy wants to say something now. And I was really tapping into the star above it, and it was Procyon, which is the little dog, like Canis Minor and Canis Major. So like they have this connection. And in Greek, the Procyon, Procyon, was before the dog. And as I start diving into Wikipedia, then for something about this star above Sirius was like, this one feels even more aligned to me. I couldn't really quite understand why, but this other dog star, before actually not a dog, before the dog, was really feeling Odin. And so I did my thing. I was looking at all these different myths around that particular asterism and looking up even facts. And I was amazed at how much connection there was. And last night I didn't really go too far into it, but I had this feeling. It was so bizarre. I looked at this. Okay, yeah, I'll spell it. Sure. It is Procyon. I believe, unless that's what I have in my notes here. And it was so odd, but I'll share one thing, and then I want to just open up to see if anything is interesting about this, whether it's about Sirius or Procyon or even the Winter Triangle, which it's part of, or anything that comes up for you all. But the last thing I'll share is when I looked at Procyon, I noticed that I looked it up and it said actually it's not really technically one star; it's a binary star system, and the pair orbit each other. And there was something odd. It said, quote in Wikipedia, the pair orbit each other with a period of 40.84 years. And I said, why does this 40.84 feel like my age? Exactly. And so for the shit of it this morning, I looked it up. And 365 times 84% is 307 days. And 307 days from May 1st last year, which is my birthday, May 1st, to yesterday is 307 days. So I just found that to be a really juicy sync that I happen to be drawn by this 40.84 figure, and only to find out that I was pretty much exactly 40.84 years old as I was having this thing last night. So I wanted to share that because I thought that was kind of interesting, and see if that pops or if that I don't know if anything sparks for folks. Do 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 do. Just going back and reading this chat. Do 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 do. Sounds like there's some alignment. Ah, guys, there's a constellation in my galactic chart that's in Regulus, Sirius opposite. Thank you for sharing. I actually don't know if it's. Thank you, Hoda. No, you're not being that guy. You're being that guy that's saving my ass. She said it is pronounced Procyon. Procyon, which sounds way better than whatever I was doing. Procyon sounds like I don't know what. Procyon. Thank you. Don't apologize, please. Can you say more about how this syncs? I feel like I have Sirius in my galactic chart. Let me see. Oh yeah. So there's a post here on Reddit. I didn't get a chance to look at it. Can you, Psychonaut, if you feel comfortable, come on off mute, please do. To share what you're bringing into the container.
We're having this conversation about archetypes of the dog and everything. And while I'm listening to this conversation, I happen to scroll across this post about a roommate's dog eating somebody's tarot deck. And if you click on it, you can see the pictures of the chewed up tarot cards. I'm like, well, I'm sitting here in Archetypal Hour, and I happen across this post of somebody, getting their tarot cards eaten by a dog. So here we are, I guess. Thanks, synchronicity.
I love it. I also got to admit, in this pile of eaten tarot cards, there's a few of these cards are some of my favorites, but the one that really stands out to me that I often see myself, like it's my current significator in my own mind with the tarot deck, is the Page of Cups, which is really chewed up. Like, dog really got that one. That's hilarious. Thank you so much for bringing that sync in. Oh, wow. Canis Minor is Hoda's Mars placement. Woo! That is interesting. Conjunct my Mars. Yeah. That's really beautiful. I don't know. Do you want to say anything about how you feel like that might connect? Or I know that might be a hard one to talk about.
Yeah, I'll say it feels a little abstract for me, but what is coming up is how, without getting too much into it, is like there are some conversations happening in my lineage space about fixed stars and constellations. And in my work in particular, I feel like Sirius has a lot to do with like my path, has a lot to do with like my path before I knew I was on the path, if that makes sense. And it's like, I don't know, it's like also a place in the sky that I get a lot of and receive a lot of wisdom from. I feel like often a student of Sirius wisdoms or Syrian wisdoms. But yeah, it does kind of feel abstract. And I guess I'm just kind of, I will say like holding space for like what it brings up for other people and like what it brought up for you, Adam, especially having like, because I'm also like a really big like numerology person, not like openly, but I'm like also like that numerology sync is not play. So I'm curious what comes up for you around that as well, or anyone else.
Thank you, Hoda. Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned how it's been really an influential star and energy for you and in your path, both sort of before and even sort of it sounds like you can anticipate it in the future going forward. And like, I will admit there was something about last night where I did actually feel like some of this sizing up, as I joked about, had to do with the broom, honestly, because I do feel like maybe Sirius is very involved in this, in maybe the people around this energy around this group. So like, anyway, I'll just admit that I did feel that as well, and I thought it was kind of cool, really cool actually. Also, I was amazed at how many different like myths. I'm just gonna read my like quick scratch notes, but I'm really just basically reading off the wiki page because last time I was just blown by this. But like in ancient Babylonia, it was called Nangar or the Carpenter, which was a deity that was related to, or it had a connection to a deity that was related to like constructing and organizing the night sky. In China, it's one of the three stars. It's part of the South River, um, and that South River is also connected with what's called like a constellation. It's the Vermilion Bird of the South, which is very connected to the fire element, and it's basically like a phoenix or like a peafowl, like a red peafowl is what it literally means, but it's a pheasant with five colored plumage in flames. So that was really resonant for me too, because like peacock and peafowl have been like just constant archetypal animals for me. I have peacocks all over my office right now, even like, and I know also that's another one of those archetypes that feels pretty shared around the Broom. Like I know there's several people that seem to be really connected with that. So I thought that was interesting. And then yeah, the Arabic star, the Al-Shira, the Syrian, or Elgomisa, which is the teary-eyed woman. Yeah, which is like kind of connected to Sirius, which in that tradition is Gomesa, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, which is the teary-eyed woman. So the bleary-eyed woman and the teary-eyed woman. And I thought that was kind of interesting too, because with the Greek, it was like there's Sirius, this like the dog star, and then Procyon before the dog. And then you kind of have this thing too with Gomesa and El Gomesa in the Arab, where it's like there's the bleary-eyed woman and then the teary-eyed woman. And it almost felt like, you get bleary-eyed before you get teary-eyed, but maybe it go in either way. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting, the connection between these two stars. In Hawaii, it's known, it's a helpful star for navigation. And it was called the canoe bailer, is sort of like the archetype around that particular asterism. And it was that, and Procyon, not Sirius now, was called Poana, which means blossom. And in Tahiti, and this is the last one, I swear. Tahiti, there's now I'm talking about Procyon here in particular. It is like translates literally to star, the priestess of brave heart, which apparently, I'm gonna say that one more time. Star, the priestess of brave heart. So that's very literal translation. And then it's one of the pillars that's propping up the sky in that lineage. And in particular, which felt really resonant with me also in terms of things that are showing up for me, it is the pillar of elocution. Elocution. So the pillar of speech. And like clean, articulate speech, I guess, or being able to, yeah, elocution. Yep. Definitely spell that out. That might be an interesting etymology too. I didn't look that up. But anyway, those were some other things that came up. And then I guess to answer your question, Hoda, like, I do not know what to make of that numerology piece. I don't know why the 40 point, as soon as I saw that number, I just felt really strongly attached to it or like connected to it. I don't know why. Maybe it was just to draw me to the sync. I guess the only other thing that I could think of with 84 is like we were just talking the other day about, I made a joke about an 84 because Uranus works on an 84-year cycle around the sun. So I don't know if there's a Uranus connection, but I will admit when I looked at that number and I saw the 84, I did think of Uranus for some reason. But then I just was like, that feels like that's how old I am. And I was blown away that actually was my exact age at this moment. And I think I was also drawn beyond the numerology. There was something about the binary nature of the star that felt very accurate to me. Like I felt like the fact that it's a binary system is one of the reasons why I felt so drawn to it. Which tells you about where I'm at in my psychic landscape, where I sometimes I can find myself into a binary and have to kind of remind myself like, whoa, hold on. I think I saw a joke recently where it's like I'm gonna butcher it, but like the ideal number of voices you're in your head is either like less than one or more than or three or more. Like basically saying like one voice or two voice ain't that. It's probably not as healthy as no voice or a nice plurality. And I think it was a joke that I saw on Twitter, but it kind of felt actually pretty accurate to my experience, where I do feel like it feels more healthy when there's maybe lots of interesting perspectives in the psyche that are expressing and sharing versus like it coalescing around just like one voice or just two kind of going back and forth. Okay, I just talked for a while, so let me open this up, see if anything is particularly interesting or if anything is coming up for people with what's going on with them or what's popping in your fields. Dun, dun, dun. Ba-dum, dum, 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 dum. Mhm. Oh, I have one more sync for this too, but I need to take a break here. But I will if no one jumps in. Boom boom da doo, ba doo da da ba doom doom, ba doo da doo doom doo doo. But maybe I could bring it back then and see if, yeah, like what do we think about wisdom of the dog, of canine wisdom? Let's maybe go there. Ooh, Hoda says loyalty is what comes up for me. Yes. 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 Are there any particular loyal? Yeah, is there anything else that's coming up around loyalty? But yeah, I agree with you. That definitely feels very important to the canine archetype, especially the dog archetype. And I will say I'm gonna use very like dog is what came up for me last night. But for some reason, I'm feeling a desire to like really expand it to canine, which would include things like wolves, foxes, coyotes. Yeah, I heard a joke in my head instantly when we were like, when I, again, whether it was imaginal or something that had some mix of reality in it, but when we were like sizing each other up, Sirius and I, this phrase like "got that dog in you" came up in my head, which is like not necessarily a good thing by any means. When someone says, "Yeah, you got that dog in you," it means like it usually means more like someone with dysregulated sexual and sacral energy. I'd say, someone who can't control their impulses, who I would say not just sexually, but like also like with anger as well. Like basically someone that's not checking their what used to be called like the baser instincts, right? Like things like anger and sexuality, lust. And also deception too. I feel like when people say like you got that dog in you, it's like, this sort of the bad part of the yeah, quote unquote bad part of a bad dog, right? If you're a good dog or a bad dog, that got that dog in you is more the bad dog archetype, if you will. The other one that came up for me was chasing its tail, which I think is because my husky puppy was chewing on her tail, and I was like, yeah, I've definitely been chasing my tail many times. I'm sure I'll do it again soon. Anything else coming up for folks? Oh, sync, Lexi said. Someone made a joke of that in Convo with me this week, and I was like, what does that mean? Now I know, I guess. Anna sends literally my view right now. Oh, talking about point of view too. Companionship comes up for me. He is so cute. What kind of dog is he? Or is it a she? He looks so serious. Psychonaut says the Ouroboros dog for chasing your own tail. Yeah, that's true. That there is a very Ouroboros or Ouroborean, if you will, move. That's so funny. Oh, this is I love that saying. I did see your LMAO. That's funny. Got that dog in them. Serious. I don't know, Hoda, if your gnosis on Sirius makes you feel like that's a relevant thing to have come up, or if that really probably is more just my bizarre psyche.
Well, no, it actually connects. I was trying to find a tweet where like somebody said once where you find out like the holy having a touch or like being touched by the Holy Spirit is realizing you have that dog in you. And now I'm like, making all these abstract like things between like Christ, Sirius, dog loyalty, like canine companionship, and I'm like, what? So don't mind me. Don't mind me.
No, it's all good. I love the way that they're all kind of like blending and playing right now. But yeah, I can appreciate how trying to articulate some of that is probably pretty darn difficult. That's amazing. I mean, I also just love dogs. I'm not gonna lie, and I love dogs in a way that this is why I feel like I was really drawn to this archetype through Sirius and through Procyon, where I've heard of this phrase like there were like harmonic flirtations around dogs and interest overlaps, and I realized that like yes, I like dogs. I love dogs. They're beautiful. They're cool. They're wonderful animals, but it's more than that in my life. This is gonna sound a little weird, but here we are. I swear sometimes when I'm in the presence of dogs, especially when like I'm in a place where I'm really safe and I'm comfortable being the weirdo that I really am, and I can like get down on the ground and start acting like a dog with the dog, it feels so comfortable for me. Like like when I say it, like I literally it feels very joyful and comfortable and aligned for me to act like a dog, which sounds ridiculous, but I must admit, like I love getting down on the ground. And so there's this part of me sometimes like, do I love dogs or do I really like the joke said, got that dog in me? Like not particularly that idiot of got that dog. More like, is there some sort of maybe prior incarnation connection or something where there is some, I don't know, remembrance of occupying this form? I have no idea, but I will just admit it. Psychonauts, that's because you got that dog. I think I do. Now again, my dog's a little bit more mature, and he's been trained, but he's still there. Yes. Hodis' dog human hybrid is so Anubis coded to me. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And actually, there was some good conversation not long ago about the hellhounds, like the archetype of that there was this association between dogs and the afterlife. That was a thing that actually I think we even flagged that as a potential thing to talk about here. I forget who. I feel like the Keepers of the All maybe brought that up. There was someone that brought that in. Gaius's playfulness. Yeah, that is one thing I love about dogs is how playful they are, and that they really just enjoy playing. I mean, like right now, we've got this 7-month-old husky, and that's all she wants to do. She's such a goofball, and I love the energy. Although sometimes it's a lot, but it's fun. Yeah, Otis says I'm thinking of Cerberus. Exactly, the three-headed dog that is in the realm of hell, and Pluto and or Hades, depending on if it's Roman or Greek. Yes, and actually that showed up a little bit when I was doing some work with Psyche and Cupid, which I was obsessed with for many weeks. Some of you know, where Psyche had to make sure she brought the sops of barley, of like these honey barley wine soaked bread to appease Cerberus to get to Proserpine, to get to Persephone, and then to come back out. Wow, that's really interesting. Lexi says Christ, oceans, and dogs have been in my field this week, along with heart mind restoration, but I feel like I'm still mapping out the connection for myself. Now, that's really interesting because it's, first of all, 2 of the 3 have been discussed already today, which is really very interesting. And Christ has been coming up, I think, ever since that we opened up that you opened up that thread under Sharia Way on Christos. Or how do you pronounce that, by the way, Odo, the way that it's spelled in our Discord server? Like starting with the H.
I would pronounce it Christos.
Christos.
Yeah.
But ever since you created that channel, I feel like there's been really juicy conversations about Jesus and about the Christ archetype and about Christ. And it's been really fun. And I think it's been really nice too because unlike the other circles where when I was in my dogmatic Christian era, you know, usually there's only so much you can say, right, before people get really offended, or it starts to you start to lose that open-mindedness, because then everyone, we start trading Christology and stuff. But in the Broom Discord, it's been so lovely, like weaving it with other lineages, really looking at it, but like with a lot of earnestness, but also with some lightness. Like, I don't know, I've just been really enjoying those conversations. I just wanted to call that out for anyone that is listening that hasn't joined us straight away as a weaver, or if they're interested in being a part of those conversations. Please let any tenders from the Broom know. But it's been really fun. And for those that aren't affiliated with the Broom Radio but are finding the Spotify, there's some really cool conversations that happen there. But yeah, that is interesting. And now I'm like kind of wondering how we can weave the three of them together too. Yeah, Hoda says so many lenses have flowered open as people have been sharing there, in my opinion. I agree. Oh, interesting. Anna says dogmatic. What is the etymology of that? Since we are talking about dogs, I don't know. I don't know if someone is feeling conviction to look that up, but that is an interesting possible sync there. Illmatic. Now I got Nas in my head. What's that beat I got in my head? Oh no, I'm losing it. What is it? Never mind. I'm gonna butcher it. Oh, I got a specific song in my head now. I can't get it. Have you all ever watched the film Dogma? A long time ago. That's the Kevin Smith one, right? With like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, where they're angels and shit. Yeah, and Alanis Morissette. Yeah, I did see it, but it's been a very long time. I don't know if anything is coming up though that feels related. I will say, like, that's another one of those movies that was, controversial, of course, because you're having fun. Kevin Smith is, he likes to make comedies, right, about Jewish and Christian lore. It's definitely going to upset some people sometimes. But I remember finding it pretty entertaining. Ooh, okay. There's some talk in the chat, so if anyone feels like enough's coming up to share, please do. Psycho not shared. There's some picture out there about Kevin Smith protesting a Dogma screening with a sign that says "Dogma is dog shit." Oh, Hoda said there's even a connection with Dune because they both are playing on Abrahamic faiths. That I can definitely see. Yeah. Yeah, and like, oh man, I'm just remembering some things from Dune from my reading of the book, but I can't wait to watch this movie. We were talking about that before we invited Craig, who is the bot that records these sessions. But yeah, I mean, Dune is so. Oh, never mind. Let me stop. Well, maybe we'll have a separate Dune container. I feel like there's enough there. Thinking. Okay, I'm gonna mispronounce that. Psychonaut, do you mind coming off mute to share more about this? Because I don't want to butcher this name. If you're able to, I know you're snacking also.
I am post snack. The pronunciation is Cuchulainn, and the story of Cuchulainn, in relation to the archetype of the dog, at least, is that Cuchulainn kills a watchdog, and agrees to basically take the place of this watchdog until a suitable replacement is found. But it's kind of got me thinking about almost like a shape-shifting, not because that's not the myth, don't get me wrong. Cuchulainn wasn't a shapeshifter, but it's still got me thinking about that archetype, right, of the shapeshifter, or fulfilling that role, and how that frames sort of this particular story of Cuchulainn.
That's interesting. Do you remember why he killed them? And do you also remember what the dog was watching against? And I don't know if you stayed on mute, but if that comes to you, please feel free to add it. But if not, don't worry about it. Guy says all this talk around dogs is making me think about how dog owners usually look and act like their dogs, like their dog is a reflection of them. I mean, so let's get into the metaphysics of this for a second. If anyone has a clear gnosis or channel on this, I'm really fascinated. But what I'm sharing is not gnosis. It is someone else's gnosis that I sort of like thought was interesting, have been sitting with, which is this idea that kind of what you're saying. I remember it was actually, you know what? It might have been in the context of human design when I was into that a couple of years ago, where I'd gone down that rabbit hole of like auras and worked around auras. But there was something I'd come across that I at the time felt convicting, where it was like, if you were to look at the aura of a dog, it was basically the same or very similar usually to the aura of the owner of the dog. This idea that, like you said, Gaia, that at least from this person's sort of vision of aura, they were able to tell a lot about the person by what their dog was doing, and that your dog's reactions, if this is according to this person, actually can sometimes tell you a bit about your own inner state. And I found that really interesting and kind of compelling, but not something that I've been able to like back up. But when I have looked at it with my own dogs, it does bring up some things for me sometimes, where I do feel like sometimes I'll notice them being skittish, and I'm like, why are you being skittish? And I do feel like they're an aspect of me that's being skittish that I'm not even conscious of. That's been one time where like I felt something that felt like a relate, like they were almost expressing something that like a part of me was feeling but not expressing, if that makes any sense. But again, that's pretty tenuous. Like, it's something I'm still just kind of looking at. I'm not really convinced on that piece, but I feel like there's enough there that I don't know, it's worth looking at more at least. But anyone has anything else on that connection of dogs and their now, because I've been watching Pokemon, I want to like. I used to never like the word master or owner, because I'm like, I don't own this dog. Like, dude, so it's a life form. Like, I don't own that. And so, like, we've been watching Pokemon. I'm like, maybe Trainer's the better one. Not that Pokemon is the best, the best archetype for fauna human relations, but definitely don't. I still kind of bristle at the term. Companions is good, yeah.
Sorry, I was grabbing some water. In regards to Cuchulainn, if memory serves correctly, essentially what had happened is that Cuchulainn was visiting somebody, and he was going to show up late to a feast, and unaware that he was going to be showing up late, the guard dog was released. And the name of the person that had invited him, the owner of this home, was named Cuchulainn. And Cuchulainn translates to Culann's hound, which is where these ideas of like shape-shifting basically came from in my mind, was the renaming, because Cuchulainn had another name that they went by prior to that point. I don't remember what that was, but when he arrived, basically just memory serves, he hit him in the head with a hurley, and then wrestled him to death. And for this, and Cuchulainn is still a child at this point. And for this, he was recognized for great strength, but he was remorseful that he had killed this important watchdog. that had kept these folks safe, and so it was complete happenstance. But a replacement was eventually found, and yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That is really interesting, and for some reason, like the way that story also has this element of like a name being changed, it kind of feels reminiscent of some things that have been coming up recently, and also one of the chapters we read recently with mysticism of Sound of Music in the book club was really about name, and I feel like I don't remember what space it was now, but I do feel like we were talking about Jacob wrestling the angel and how after that he's changed and his name is now Israel. And I think that's kind of interesting that in both cases there's this wrestling and a name change. But I also really find it interesting that the dog here is sort of like this threshold guardian a little bit, at least the way it kind of sounds from your description, and how, yeah, by mistake, this boy has to wrestle this threshold guardian, overcomes them, but then has to become the threshold guardian, so to speak, until a replacement can be found. That's a really fascinating myth. Thank you for sharing that with us. Oh, and a cool image too. Wow. And Hoda was also sharing some things about sort of this reflection, and she kind of mentioned this phrase, the morphogenic fields, the morphogenic, sorry, not genetic, morphogenic fields. Maybe she said, "LOL." But then before that, especially considering the metaphysics of shared space with animal companions and human companions, and that did feel interesting to me, like that yeah, what we might be, what I was talking about before, might be kind of also this feature of like what it's like to have all these shared energies with different life forms in the same space. Yeah, it does kind of remind me of last week's convo on intercessory figures too. Thank you for bringing that up, Hoda. Psychonauts, going back to the myth we were discussing before. Not only that, but he carries this with him in the form of his name. That's interesting. Ooh, sit with that for 1 second. But he carries this with him in the form of his name. Mm. Ooh. Yeah. Well, I feel like there's been a lot here, so now I feel like I'm feeling the desire to sort of see if I can. I'm gonna sit for one moment and see if there's a question that might want to help us as we try to weave some of these things that have been brought up into this container so far. And for some reason, I'm feeling myself like a little bit drawn towards Lexi's big three of Christ, dog, and ocean. I'm feeling that's a really interesting triumvirate. I will say one last thing on dog, going back to the star, I guess, while I maybe am still hopefully trying to find that question to do some weaving. I had picked up a book at a bookstore. Oh, please, someone just came off. Please share. Is that you, Psychonaut? Oh. I was at a bookstore and I found this book about star stories that I got to read with my daughter. And the cover is actually from the Greek story, The Fox and the Hound, which is talking about these exact stars we were just talking about, or these constellations. And I won't go through the whole thing because it's kind of an interesting story, and I'm getting the version that you can like tell a kid. So based on even just how violent this version is, I imagine the original myth is a bit more crazy. But it involved, like in this case, the upper fox, right? The one that's above Sirius. It was sort of like the archetype of the fox destined never to be caught, and the dog underneath was this like mythic Laplace, this hunting dog who always catches its prey. And so the story kind of had this really interesting way that this dog ended up in the possession of different people through all these weird circumstances. But at the end, the dog, the hunting dog who always catches its prey, and the fox who's destined never to be caught. They end up in this like eternal stalemate where they're just chasing each other forever. And so Zeus was finally like, yo, this is too much. And he turns them into stones and then brings them up into the night sky to make them stars to kind of end the endless chase. And something about that, some of the harmonics of that myth also felt kind of relevant to me. This idea of like, hey, maybe we can stop the chase for a moment and just like take a bigger view. At least that's what came up for me when I was trying to integrate that particular myth with it, which I had just read like 2 weeks ago. That was the first one we read from this book too. And I thought that was kind of another funny sync with these particular stars. Yeah, I guess I'm feeling a little bit of an urge just to maybe there's a little more on this dog piece is what's coming up for me. Oh, Hoda says, wow, that's pretty powerful. I feel like what you said about the epic chase. Yeah. 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 And I like how like there's like this is kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit with Doom, but I was like, that's a whole other container. But like this element of like destiny was coming into this play of like that in the myth, these dogs had like opposing destinies or fates that are attached to who they were. And it was really interesting that when they're brought into this dynamic pairing, it like, you know, it just becomes this really wild paradox of these intertwined fates that are also opposing each other. Okay. Hoda said she's working on something to try to make legible. I'm going to check in on you, Hoda.
Well, it actually kind of relates. I was like being over here as you were speaking because I'm like, yeah, it actually, what was coming through for me was around that, like around fate and around destiny, adjacent to Dune. But I also, I don't know, I kind of feel this also weaving connected to like dogs and their loyalty and like that, like the idea of like companionship and like even what we were speaking to earlier about this like abstract melding of like human and animal consciousness, I feel relates to like on the one hand I want to say like it relates to like integrating the anima, but on the other hand I feel like it more abstractly relates to like yeah, like what you were speaking to, like this idea, especially what you said about the chase, reflects to me like this idea about our fate and destiny being something that's always kind of like maybe shielding following us or like is always kind of like bursting at the seams and like speaking to us. And I think about in the sense how a lot of people in metaphysical and spiritual communities really connect to the ideas of signs and how like signs are kind of like, for the most part, for most people, I feel like a communication, and for me has been like communication of like my destiny. Like, am I on the right path? If that was like the larger question that I was asking, I feel like signs and synchronicities really help weave that together for me and for other people that I do know. So I'm just kind of like, which is weird because I'm like, okay, dogs are not necessarily like figures of destiny. Like I think of a lot of people saying that they see like birds or like a cat when they're like have like experienced signs, but I'm also like I've recently had experiences with dogs, which I shared in the Broom, but I'll share it again, where they kind of came out in a moment where I was like in a frenzy and like going through it, let's say, and I was just like, yo, like dogs and like this idea of like protecting our fate is also what's coming through for me. Adam says my audio is acting up. Can y'all still hear me?
I missed a little piece of it. I hear you perfectly now, but I don't know if it might have been on my end. I couldn't tell, but I missed
Okay.
a part. But I did hear the last bit about okay, so it was my end. That's what I thought, Anna. Yeah, if you can just I'm so sorry to make you summarize
No,
the
it's
last.
totally good. Yeah, I think what I was kind of saying was like some of the synchronicities and experiences that I've had with dogs where they've showed up for me in times where I've been like really afraid or like scared, kind of point to this kind of, I guess my conclusion of this point is like a curiosity and a question if like dogs are, or like the canine is a figure that protects um one's fate or like our destiny or protects us on the path of our fate and destiny, and maybe like subconsciously, metaphysically, that's why dogs are considered man or people or humanity's like quote unquote best friend. um so yeah, I know that was kind of a lot, but
No, that's beautiful, and it feels really accurate to me too. And I think I'm seeing some other people in the chat say that it feels aligned for them too. And it feels kind of connected to the fact that these dogs show up a lot in the underworld myths as well to me. Um, because you can see the underworld as like this scary thing because it's, relates to things like death, which a lot of humans are afraid of. But like at a higher level, at a different octave, like death is this, amazing transformation, right? And this culmination of sort of karma, where it's sort of you're accumulating new karma, you're releasing old karma, and there's this period. I've always been fascinated by this period. And again, my sun sign is in the nakshatra of Bharani, which is ruled by the deity Yama, the Hindu god of death, or personified essentially. And Bharani, the nakshatra, and Yama, the god, is associated with this process. Um, anyway, just kind of thinking about what you were saying about dogs as sort of potentially metaphysical representations, or somehow, like we said, in this intercessory archetype that about fate and destiny does feel really accurate to me, where it's like maybe there's some things that we don't really want to do, but they're part of the story, part of the mission, part of the work, whatever you want to phrase it. There's that element of fatedness. And that's really cool that dogs have showed up for you in that way. Wow. I will say too, dogs have showed up in weird ways for me. I think the most strange thing that comes up for me right now is just how many times I've um, caught a dog that was loose. And it happened so many times that like now when it happens, I'm not even surprised. I'm like, oh, there's a stray dog. Like it's my turn to go collect this dog real quick. And I don't know what that is, but I will say now that you're putting it in these terms, it does feel like there is a message there that I should probably meditate on further. So thank you, Hoda.
for sure. And I was also, what was coming to me as you were speaking was, earlier I had mentioned Anubis, and this idea of
Yeah.
like dogs and fate feel even more related because it's like, I think in the Kemetic lore, Anubis is like the figure that kind of either like takes the heart to weigh on the scales of like judgment after a soul like passes up through this world into the next world. And so it kind of doubles down on like what you were saying, like this relationship between like fate, the canine, the figures that these canines play in our life, like sometimes
Yeah.
as like stray dogs or like best friends as like pets. So yeah, that's really juicy to me.
Ooh. It also kind of feels fun in relationship to this sync that Psychonaut is sharing, which he said, there's a big black lab that lives in my neighborhood named Jim. And if we ever see him, we're supposed to say, Jim, go home. And he knows what that means, LMAO. And then later he said, just saw Jim for the first time yesterday. And I just, for some reason, when I heard that anecdote and the whole like Jim go home in relationship to what Hoder's speaking to about fate, it's sort of like, it felt related of like this dog that's like by saying go home, it's also like this little kind of metaphysical reminder, like, yeah, go back to your home, your core of who you are. I don't know what, maybe that's a bit of a stretch and a weave, but that feels very connected, and I really appreciate that being brought in to sort of like, oh, wow, that's cool. Okay. Now that's a loop in the knot. Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh man. Wow. I'm just feeling really grateful for dogs right now. I will say, dogs are one of those things too, where every once in a while I'm with a dog, or I'll be looking at videos of dogs or something, and then I've heard other people say this, but I'll say it too sometimes, and it's sort of commonplace. But I'll be like, I don't think we deserve dogs. Like this idea of like they're almost too good for us to even be worthy of their presence, and yet they're ubiquitous. And it says, because also like, how can you stay mad around a dog? And I don't really know. I don't know how you could. I mean, I guess even like mean dogs and grumpy dogs, they crack me up. I love how grumpy they are sometimes. I love all of it. Guy says, I'm thinking about how I used to be scared of dogs when I was younger, and thinking about what Hoda said about destiny, and now I respect them. That is interesting. This sort of transition from fear to respect. Hoda says, I'm also feeling into their protective aspect. Yeah. Yeah, we actually just watched the movie Beethoven for the first time. For anyone that has seen that delightful 80s family movie called Beethoven. And there's several scenes of that protective aspect of the dog that I was like, almost got me in tears. This like goofy 80s movie about a gigantic Saint Bernard and a grumpy dad who doesn't want anything to do with Saint Bernard. But yeah, you're right. That protective, that like instinctual protective streak. How dogs let you know when shit's going down or about to go down. This says I was obsessed with those movies. Yeah, there's like a ton of them. We haven't watched all of them yet. But yeah, and how important it is, like when you think about this relationship between humans and wolves, right? Which is where dogs originate from. This very like functional working relationship, that's evolved over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. How that innovation in partnership like changes the entire arc of human evolution, and how powerful it is to have animals living in your community and being able to raise the alarm and being able to be thoughtful. And actually, I saw something recently where there was this really cool story about, and I think it's something that they've known for a while, but maybe I just was aware of it more recently, where wolves and ravens will work together, where they will share food, and the ravens go out and basically scout. They come back, tell the wolves where the action, and they work together and they share the spoils. And I thought that was so interesting. Also, kind of a funny weaving, because last week Odin came up, right? And Odin is associated with ravens, and now we've got dogs this week. But it was really interesting, and the article I was reading said that like there was even a case where they found that the wolves left their wolf pups with the ravens while the wolves went to go out and hunt to bring the food back. So it's like now the ravens are not just scouting, they're like babysitting. Like this is like a true partnership. And I just thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Or at least, it just really struck me as a beautiful thing. So I wanted to share that in case anyone else thought that. Yes, wow, interspecies collaboration. Like, that's one of those things that gets me in the feels too. When I see like the cross species partnerships or friendships, like that's always going to get me. That's an easy way to get me teary eyed. Easy. I don't know why. There's something about like cross species working together that always excites me. Thank you for sharing that, Psychonaut. And yeah, if you feel like saying anything more, please do. Yeah, he was saying that he's been reflecting on Odin since the conversation, and kind of can feel a new Odin practice that might be developing.
So I had always felt a lot of kinship with Odin when I had initially started getting into indigenous European practices. And unfortunately, I allowed myself to be misled because my practice is primarily Celtic. This kind of touches on other conversations that we've been having lately about the nature of these societies. But I was essentially told that, mixing together of Celtic and Germanic spirituality is not a practice that one should engage in. And then now that I'm older and wiser and am under the impression that that's more actually what these practices look like historically when they were practiced. These constructs that we have now of like Celtic and Germanic are like totally ahistorical. I'm revisiting this idea. But I had allowed that initial bad advice to steer my practice for a while. And particularly one of the aspects that I had been reflecting on was sacrifice. And one of the things that I had always kind of held against Odin, or one of the reservations that I had about Odin, was his obsession with Ragnarok, because this is a very common theme in the Eddas. Odin is completely consumed with Ragnarok and preventing it and what can be done and all of this, and it sort of elucidates this like burden of knowledge sort of theme, right? Had he been ignorant of Ragnarok, it wouldn't have ever been a problem. But now that he knows it's coming, it just consumes him, right? And I'm thinking about it a lot more, and I'm like, I'm on the same exact bullshit, with in regards to the kind of society that I want to build. Briefly, like a post-scarcity sort of society, and the aversion of climate change. And I'm thinking more about climate change in the context specifically of being a regenerative farmer, and Ragnarok is described in a lot of similar ways that we see in terms of climate change, like the land turning to ash. We can think of this in sort of the way of like wildfires and stuff like that, and the oceans will raise and consume all of the land. We can think of this in terms of like sea levels rising and things like this. And I was just like, well, damn, I'm on that same exact bullshit of being consumed, but in trying to prevent this somewhat inevitable crisis, because of the knowledge that I've sought out. It's opened some very interesting new pathways for me, and I feel like, and importantly too, it's not like it, I think that there's a profound difference between sacrifice in the context of sort of being misled by like a demagogue or kind of being puppeted by an ideology, right? Versus like the conscious decision to make a sacrifice and engage with the paradox of inevitability and fate, right? And I think that's what I see in Odin, is a knowing sacrifice and willingness to engage despite the inevitable. And I can really appreciate that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like there's so many things that were coming up for me as I was hearing you describe it, and I'm like trying to parse out where to go. But I just want to really thank you for all of that. And I think, yeah, there was a lot that felt really connected to things that we've been discussing too, about fate and destiny, and even the sort of chasing their own tail kind of vibe too, like kind of rhyming with that vibe, I feel like too. And it just made me realize that, like, I think, like, if we got real eschatological, end times one day in one of these containers, we would probably have to do some real shielding and containment. And but I feel like that could be a really fruitful conversation, because you are right that, like, it's so fascinating that Odin, like, as you said, was sort of obsessed with Ragnarok, and how you saw that trend. And yeah, it was really resonant with me, because there was a time in my Christian, like what I call like my dogmatic Christian phase, where like I was really obsessed with the book Revelation and eschatology, and yeah, it's an interesting thing to have as an obsession. So I'll just leave it there for now. It has a lot of implications. Let's put it that way. But wow. Yeah, and Hoda says apocalypse archetypes are rampant in current time, I feel. Yeah, like I think that might be a really interesting thing to spend more deliberate time with in a container, either here or maybe even a separate thing where we just talk. But I really appreciate you bringing that in. And yeah, I'm curious to hear how that goes, and if a new practice with Odin finds its way. It also feels related to some of the like halal syncretism that has been talked about in the Discord server about sort of when it's appropriate to syncretize with other lineages and how. And I think a lot of that sort of conversation came out of some great stuff that Hoda posted from another person, Dr. Angela Uka, I think, UCA. And the main takeaway I remember from that conversation was this idea that, like, if you are going to thread a lineage with another, how important it is to be always intellectually articulate or honest about, hey, this thing that I'm kind of seeing into this archetype, it was not there originally. Like, I'm going in this direction because of these reasons. Like, being clear about it and not pretending, like, not adding things to lineages that weren't there and then pretending like they were there, and how dangerous that is. And so, but that's very different than like saying like, oh yeah, you're not allowed to bring in other lineages, or like sort of like these gods don't get along. And I do wonder about that too sometimes. As someone who was, when I was younger, obsessed with bringing lots of groups of friends together, I kind of saw that as part of my archetype when I was in high school and part of my self-identity. And sort of like, I do sometimes think about like, what's it look like when I got these Hindu and Christian deities and concepts like playing with each other, like, and there's other esoteric astrology too. Like in my psyche, I have these like fun little groups of friends, and yeah, sometimes it's pretty messy, and sometimes they fight. But there's some really cool stuff that comes out of some of that, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I think it's always good to be careful, but I also think it's so nice to have these different ideas intersect with each other and see what comes out of it personally. Yeah, Hoda on the syncretism said, yes, be honest if you're going to rewrite the record, is how I feel. Amen. Hoda says, gods be beefing. I mean, especially, if you take that first commandment seriously, as I was drilled into my head when I was in Catholic, when I was in CCD. And now there's jokes because our Flavabot, our DJ, found his way into the container. And now he says, I'm not playing music. This is odd. We've got a bot up in here. What is going on right now? Did he just say something? He just said something. I'm not playing music. All right, Flavabot. Jim, go home. That's a good way to bring it together. Oh man, that was odd. But delightfully odd. I mean, then again, I always think things that are odd is kind of delightful. For me, there's a lot of overlap between those sensations. Oh man, and this is not the robot talking back to me. We are definitely in a new era. Well, I'm being mindful of time now. I see it's about 4:30, so I want to invite people to maybe share any final questions. This is how it starts, guys. For real, man. It's like Flavabot's like, I'm gonna be laughing when, like, once Flavabot starts playing their own music, then we're really gotta be worried, right? We'll start adding stuff to the queue, and you're like, did you add that? No. Oh, okay. What's going on here? What is going on here? But I want to invite people to start to think about if there's anything they came up today that they found interesting that they want to put in their pocket for later, or things that they might be finding themselves meditating upon, or things that they found particularly relevant for them. Anything that's coming up for them, no worries if nothing's comes up and you've wasted your 90 minutes. I'm not offended at all. But I do love to hear people kind of what's standing out to them as they close out. And now we got some Space Odyssey. Hal 9000 has showed up. Is it 2000 or 9000? Like, oh, Hal 8000. It looks like. I couldn't remember the number, but Hal from Space Odyssey has showed up. Sorry, I can't let you do that, Dave. That movie is so good too. Also, Denis from Dune fames. I think it was one of his favorite movies that he mentioned recently, or maybe I'm thinking of someone else. Yeah, so any takeaways? Anyone that wants to come off mute, anything that they're trying to still weave, or things like, oh, I'm feeling unresolved here, please. I'd love to hear it. Hoda says, I feel like I'm going to be meditating on intercessory figures some more, I feel, and also dogs too. I'm going to be on the lookout for them in the astral streets. Please do. Please report back. I feel like dogs, and again, a lot of this came up last night for me. And yeah, so it's still pretty fresh. I'm going to be doing the same thing. Dogs is a big takeaway too. And also this idea of like, yeah, this connection with the underworld that I had almost forgotten about last night when it came up. And this connection of like metaphysical guides is also really coming up for me. So I'm really going to sit with that too. Thank you, Hoda. And Sirius. Yeah. I mean, thank you for pointing to the thread in Sirius. I might have to try to share some of that there while it's still kind of fresh in my head. But that was the first time. And it's funny too, like I've looked at a lot of stars in the last couple of years doing this kind of practice. And this is the first time Sirius really felt strong to me. So I'm not taking that lightly. Anyone else have any final thoughts, takeaways, questions, or just anything that they just feel like saying off mute? Please jump on. I'm feeling kind of a desire. I have my tarot cards in my hand. So if part of me kind of wants to pull a card just to see, or pull a couple cards. Soda. All right, I'm going to pull one card, at least. Just see. Oh, it's my boy the Hermit. Now that is interesting because I saw him earlier today on a completely unrelated thing. Somehow we were. Oh, God! Now I know how this is. That itch to pull a card so real. Do it. So I'm gonna do some weaving for a second, just because this is funny to me. My wife was telling me that there's like a new variant of a Taylor Swift album that's called Black Dog that was announced today, which I thought was really funny. Also because her and I used to love the Harry Potter movies and like Sirius Black. I don't know, Black Dog. Like it all kind of like it just made me laugh. I was cracking up this morning when she was like, "It's Black Dog." I said, "What?" I said, "What you talking about?" I was like, "What? How is this Black Dog happening?" Anyway, then I was talking about the Led Zeppelin song Black Dog, and I have Led Zeppelin 4, the album, and I happened to open it up because my daughter wanted to hear it, and inside the album cover is the Hermit. So I just find that really funny, kind of thinking that this is the second time I'm seeing the Hermit, and I got there through Black Dog. And Hermit also feels like a very Odin pull. Thank you, Psychonaut. What the hell? Can't make this shit up, folks. Dang. You are so right. This is Odin's card, or one of them. This and the Hangman are both very Odin coded. Shoot, what the hell? With one L, yeah. What? All right, I am going to look at the bottom of this deck too. And it's the Four of Pentacles. This guy's an interesting guy. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but this feels very... I'm going to take a picture real quick. But wow, the Hermit. I am dying. That's funny. Actually, I'm not going to take a picture because I'm too slow. But basically, it's this guy on like a balcony overlooking the city, and he's got a pentacle under each foot, a pentacle on his crown, and then he's holding the pentacle, and his arms are really shaped in a bizarre way that sort of looks like almost like a cycle, like a circle around. He's got a very serious look. I always liked this guy, but he always looked like he was like you know, he knew more than you. Like I would never try to mess with the Four of Pentacles. I would never try like try to outsmart this dude. Like, I'm just going to assume this guy is a couple steps ahead of me, and I'm going to act accordingly. At least that's what I get the energy from this guy. Interesting. Well, I'm going to sit with that, but the Hermit, I really appreciate how the Hermit kind of weaved, I feel like, a little bit for us. Odin and the dog and Sirius again. And I really want to thank everybody for coming here, for bringing this all, and for hopefully having fun looking at these different archetypes, looking at these wonderful syncs, looking at these resonances that we feel in our lives, and what they might be drawing us to. So if no one has any final thoughts, I will go up, find Craig, and let him go. And thank everybody immensely for spending some time with me and with this whole group today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And feel free, I'll make a thread in here for those that are a part of this server. We'll make sure to continue the conversation in the Archetypal Hour channel for anyone that has anything they want to report back. Thank you all.